All right. Well, it looks like it's about that time, so let's get started.
All
Give
right.
you all your time. So, welcome everybody. It looks like we've got several people logged in, which is awesome. Welcome to our Interdisciplinary History Conference. And my name is Liz Inslee. I'm an assistant history professor here at Weatherford College. And I am more than happy to introduce Marcie DeChiara, who's got what's going to be a really cool presentation on freedom to and freedom from an appeal to female subservience in A Handmaid's Tale and the Testaments. So a few things before we get started. Everyone who is attending this, it's important to note just for your peace of mind, we cannot see you. We cannot see you, we cannot hear you. So if there's background noise or if you're in your pajamas, which it's 9 o'clock on a Friday morning, most of us probably would be, we can't see you. So don't worry about that. The only thing that is important is that y'all enjoy. And if anybody does have any questions, if you go to the bottom of your screen, you'll see the Q&A button. And if you have any questions that you want to ask or want me to ask at the end of the presentation, just put them there and I will be more than happy to do so. And with that, I'll let Marcie get started.
All right. All right. Well, thank you for that introduction, Liz. My name is Marcie DeChiara. I am an English instructor at Weatherford College who mostly teaches composition and rhetoric. So rhetoric and meanings of words are things that are particularly of interest to me. I do want to go ahead and start this because I think I have a lot of material to cover today. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Okay, so there has been a great deal of interest in Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale from 1985 and its sequel, The Testaments, which was published in 2019. The Handmaid's Tale has been adapted as a film, an opera, most recently a television series going into season 4. So they have outstripped the original story. Many scholars have examined the dystopic aspects of the novel where the Congress of the United States has been conquered by a direct attack on the Capitol and gunned down in a planned attack by a large sect of Christian Dominionist, the Sons of Jacob. So that is the setting of our story if you are unfamiliar. Sorry. And we see two common editions of the book here, the Margaret Atwood Handmaid's Tale, where we see the Boston Wall, and then of course the cover of the Commons, or sorry, the Testaments. All right, so just to familiarize everyone with the material here. In the Handmaid's Tale, the United States has fallen to an insurrectionist sect called the Sons of Jacob, who have been using the respectable veneer of a think tank to recruit and radicalize young men nostalgic for a more patriarchal world. After invading the Capitol building and machine gunning down members of Congress, the United States falls from within, suspending the Constitution and making profound changes to the daily life and movements of the former citizens of the United States. We learned this from the story of Offred, the woman who was captured by the Gileadian. This is, we have gone from the United States to Gilead, changing the name to reflect a more monotheistic ethos for this new government that the Sons of Jacob have placed. So we learned the story from Offred, who is a woman who was captured by Gileadian authorities after trying to flee with her husband and daughter to Canada. Her husband is presumably killed, and her daughter is snatched away from her to be placed with another family. Offred is then re-educated at the Rachel and Leah Center to learn to accept her new place in society as a handmaid. And a handmaid is, if you are familiar with the story, a vessel for pregnancy, that her whole purpose and being is to get pregnant and then to give up that baby to higher ranking members of the Gilead society. All right, so Offred and the other new handmaids are captured by Gilead and sent to be re-educated by the ants, who are an authority in the women's sphere of this new gender segregated world. The ants are the primary indoctrinators of the newly captured women and are armed with cattle prods for quick corrections, wire cables to administer beatings, and show indoctrination films such as snuff pornography to illustrate how much the previous society of the United States cared so little for individual women. The ants also attempt to persuade these fertile women by turning from Enlightenment philosophies, which promise political liberalism. That's freedoms that offer pursuit of happiness with as little interference from the state as possible. The ants insist upon these new citizens of Gilead to use state-approved ritualized language to control the behaviors of these women and transition them to a life with a highly structured and violently enforced new norms. Okay. All right. Nope. Oh, here we go. All right, so let's talk a little bit about language, persuasion, and power. While there are many characters in Handmaid's Tale and in the Testaments, I want to concentrate on the primary figure of Aunt Lydia, who is the one of the founders of Gilead, and in particular is the main authority in the women's sphere. So Aunt Lydia has many methods of persuasion, both physical, but her biggest weapon is language, which is used to soften resistance to these handmaids, to make them feel that they have no choice, but that the choice is a good one. Now, it's a fairly typical and well-documented method for indoctrinating people. We see it from other authoritarian governments. We see it in cults. So this is not surprising that Atwood is using these tried and true techniques to get compliance. So the reader is introduced to Aunt Lydia, the founder of the ants and chief indoctrination architect of the Handmaids. As Offred tells her story, memories of Aunt Lydia are frequently intrude as she supplies reasons for the handmaids to let go of their resistance. While the ants supplement their persuasion with punishments such as beatings or holding uncomfortable postures, which of course is, and withholding bathrooms, which are all techniques to break resistance. Their main weapon is the continual repetition of how the time before was dangerous and emphasizing how much security a handmaid can expect if she just fulfills her duties. If she brings forth children, then she has nothing to fear. Aunt Lydia's soft voice and big stick permeates Offred's telling of the story. We see the first mention of Aunt Lydia telling Offred that she is in a position of honor, which means that she should use the front door when they are going into her commander's house. That is where she is placed to be ritually raped and then to bring forth children. And that is the main setting of the story. But when she can go through the front door, for the first time because this is a place of honor. Of course, Offred is also hemmed in by the disposition of honor. She must remember Aunt Lydia's soft admonitions because beyond being an incubator for a baby, she doesn't have much else to do. So the soft power of language and the shifting meanings within these texts are purposely used in the stories. While we could talk about the commander, who is interestingly enough a former market researcher who helps to give shape to some of these speeches and these foundational rhetorical strategies that Aunt Lydia uses. I do want to concentrate mostly on Aunt Lydia for the day. So first, we want to understand that Aunt Lydia uses persuasions, that she emphasizes the poor and depraved behaviors of a free society where people are often lost in the cracks. There are seemingly no cracks in Gilead, at least according to the official line. You are seen and valued for your work, which brings ambition to do anything else but to procreate, to heal. And this is especially for handmaids. Gilead is a country that is declining in their population, and the handmaids are supposed to be key to reestablishing population dominance. All right, so the first way that Aunt Lydia is introduced is at the Rachel and Leah Center, where she tells the handmaids, what she refers to as girls, is that the Republic of Gilead knows no bounds, that Gilead is within you, which of course implies that if Gilead is everywhere, there is no escape because it is so powerful. So since you can't beat them, join them. You might as well be proud to be a part of such a vast and powerful nation. When trying to persuade against longing for the old United States, that Aunt Lydia tells the girls with much sympathy in her voice that we were a society dying of too much choice. Now, if you can imagine that as both being soft and also being delivered as an admonition, then you can see the persuasive power of it. So the implication here is that while Aunt Lydia seems to imply that contraception created this death spiral of not enough children, the context of Offred's memory is that of old movies such as movie stars as Katharine Hepburn. So as Aunt Lydia is talking about the United States being dying of too much choice, Offred is actively remembering things such as button-up shirts in movies, which suggested that they can be unbuttoned and that was an individual choice. We get both a sense that Offred is longing for this time before, but also can understand where Aunt Lydia is coming from. And we start to see little cracks that maybe Offred is accepting her life more than we, the audience, think that she should. Okay. Aunt Lydia also reminds Offred and the other handmaids of the objectification of the United States, especially of women. The spectacles women used to make of themselves, oiling themselves like roast meat on the spit, bare backs and shoulders, on the street, in public, and legs. Not even stockings on them. No wonder those things used to happen. And of course, those things meant, women were assaulted. That this would not happen in Gilead. Now, this is a particularly layered statement. It asks the handmaids to remember a time before from a different lens. And discussing cool and comfortable clothes that expose skins or vacations on the beach, which are considered to be very pleasant activities, Lydia reframes them as attention-seeking behaviors designed to torment men into rape. Modesty means being invisible. And we actually see her say this on page 28 of The Handmaid's Tale. And so being objectified, so being seen is to be objectified and blamed for any harassment or assault. This immodest shoulder inflames and is to blame for the violence. So these are a few examples of the constant phrases and cadences that are whispered into the handmaid's ears. And then they are followed by Aunt Lydia's promises for why they should be grateful, but also why they need to, why the handmaids, that's the day here, should accept their new lot in life because they're going to be a foundational part of a great society. So let's go ahead and take a look at Aunt Lydia on childbirth. That in this case, the greater the risk, the greater the glory. She clasped her hands, radiant with our phony courage, as the quote goes on. The implication here is that Aunt Lydia is framing the handmaids as soldiers, leaning on the patriotism that societies often develop to talk about the glory of their military. By casting handmaids in this role of soldiers for the greater good, it also dampens their expectation that they will come out of childbirth alive. Everyone knows that mothers giving birth and soldiers in a war can die. The promise of Gilead itself and the future generations, Aunt Lydia has to say that you are a transitional generation. It's the hardest for you. For the ones that come after you, it will be easier. They will accept their duties with willing hearts because they won't want things that they can't have. So Aunt Lydia is somewhat sympathetic to the handmaids, but feels that she has to be a hard taskmaster in order to get to these greater generations, these future generations. And we can continue to see her full vision for Gilead women in the women's sphere. Is that women will live in harmony, and you, the handmaids, will be like daughters to them. And we will no longer have to transfer you from one house to another because there will be enough to go around. Women united for a common end. Now, I find this one of the more particularly interesting quotes here because it does a lot of things. First off, in order to make women safe and secure for society, it is acknowledged that handmaids are passed around. Now, in my world, and living in the United States, a woman being passed around has always been a bad thing. So here we have this as a necessary evil, and that it's framed as one that is good and positive. So in order to make women safe and secure for a future society, women are passed around the ranks of commanders as breeding stock. This has naturally caused resentment in the handmaids. This is the feminist utopia that Aunt Lydia promises. And in fact, there are women are going to be united for a common end, and that it's unfortunate that the handmaids now have been subjected to being the first generation, but in the end, it's going to be a feminist paradise where women are united for a common end. Now, this is ultimately ironic because if you are familiar with the rest of the story, the Offred's mother is a feminist, and that she also has a vision for women united to a common end, and that is to end the violence, as does Gilead. However, the differences are that we are going to start talking about women united as volunteers as opposed to women united because they have no choice. We can go ahead and look at scholars like Fiona Tolan, who makes the case that The Handmaid's Tale is a feminist utopia that has gone wrong. Now, I think that we'll just kind of glance over discussions of feminisms. I just want to put into the context that in 1985, Margaret Atwood is writing at the beginning of third wave feminism and is looking at the conflicts between second wave and third wave feminisms that are starting to emerge. So let's talk a little bit about the background of second wave feminism. So second wave feminism of the 1960s through 80s focuses on issues of equality and discrimination. Second wave feminism has the slogan, "The personal is political." and identifies women's cultural and political inequalities as inextricably linked, and encourage women to understand how their personal lives reflect sexist power structures. This is going to pave the way for third wave feminisms, where we start really examining those intersections. In second wave feminism, you can see this, that Betty Friedan wrote The Feminine Mystique, which has really started to articulate the positions of the second wave. In 1963, her book, The Feminist Mystique, criticized the idea that women could find fulfillment only through childbearing and homemaking. So, of course, as we remember Aunt Lydia and her promises, Gilead wants to see women taken back before the second wave to where the hearth and home are the only choices. Friedan, of course, had criticized that idea. So Friedan also hypothesizes that women are victims of false beliefs requiring them to identify in their lives through their husband and their children. And again, we see Aunt Lydia, who is encouraging to put aside these ideas that you can have an identity outside the home, outside of being a woman. That is strictly forbidden in this world of Gilead. So while the second wave feminists insist that women have their own identity as duties outside of her duties as a wife and mother, the Gilead vision for society is ostensibly to give everyone within that society a greater purpose by calcifying these gender roles and norms, or gender roles and norms that are more traditional. This should be a utopia where everyone has a purpose and that is useful and productive. Men are providers, wives run the household. Marthas, who are the domestic help, clean and cook. Handmaids have the babies. Everyone has their place. These roles are neat and orderly. While everyone can be easily identified by their clothing, for in Gilead, wives dressed in blue, handmaids in red, Martha's in red, in green, and commanders are in black. You can always tell someone's role by what it is they wear. There is no mystery. So, and people should be satisfied in Gilead doing this, because you are enjoying the respect that's due to your station. In some ways, or in many ways, this Gilead society creates a sense that everybody contributes and everybody gives what they can, what they must. And that is the way that society works. So it is closed, but everyone has a place and there is no one falling through those cracks. In the sequel of the Testaments, we see from the point of view beyond Aunt Lydia and beyond Offred, and that we see different characters, and these cracks between the cast are, of course, they become apparent, and you can see the disdain that that the characters have for one another based on what their role is in the society. So this idea, this utopia that everybody will have a place and everybody will be respected for it, does not actually happen in practicality or in real life, at least in the novel. All right, so we look at Offred's mother, who is a second wave feminist, very outspoken. She is never married. She is politically active, and she's involved in a specific a scene in here where she is filmed taking back the night, which we still have today. But in the 1970s, it was women marching the streets in order to make those streets safer and feel like that there was a place for women to be out. We have another feminist here, Moira, who is an outspoken feminist, is a lesbian, is one of Offred's best friends, college roommates, from when she actually had a name before Offred. Moira is also a feminist who wants to seek a woman-only enclave, which is interesting because that is what she gets, is women only. In several scenes, whether she is a handmaid, whether she is in the indoctrination center, or later, whenever she is transferred to a brothel, it is all a women-only enclave, and none of it holds the promise that the utopia of second wave feminism had offered. Moira lives through her abilities to live life independently, that she thinks that Offred's mother is quaint, and that she has the ability to go beyond her gender roles by fixing her car. And more importantly, she takes those skills in order to escape the Red Center for the first time. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the difference between the utopia of feminism and the Gilead utopia. So Aunt Lydia, and we're going to see this in a moment, is going to take philosophies that we have used for Western Enlightenment thought, and has offered a lesser but more secure form of liberty. That the character of Serena Joy, who is the commander's wife, who will be raising any child that Offred has, used to be a Christian celebrity who lamented her part in having to go out and leave the home, and now she lives that tradition that a woman's place is in the home, and it doesn't seem to fit. In this Gilead utopia, lower caste men are sexually chaste and awarded with wives if they behave themselves. Upper caste men are married. They have handmaids and access to brothels like Jezebel's. So we see that that this Gilead utopia really caters to the upper class, and that that everybody else is subject to these very, very harsh strictures. All right, so I want to change gears for just a moment here and talk about our foundational Western philosophies. The one that I want to talk about in particular, although there are many we can choose from, is Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative. So what that is, which you should all be familiar with, but just in case, let's do a quick review. And that is that you should act only on that maxim through which you can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law. So what does that mean? Well, what it means is that there is a golden rule to treat others as you would, that the golden rule to treat others as you would like to be treated is actually an insufficient way of looking at the world. That instead, you should be asking how you should treat people, how you should give everyone maximum freedom, and to never treat people as a means to an end. That is, that you don't use people, you respect them for their autonomy, and that you allow, that you do not try to curtail freedom, even if that means it benefits you. Here's an example of what I mean. So if you don't want, you wouldn't say, don't lie if you want people to like you. So that is, treat others as others would treat you. That's the golden rule. But the categorical imperative would ask you to say, what if everybody lied? Would you want to live in that world? And if the answer is no, don't lie. So this is foundational to our philosophies in the United States. This is the philosophy that our Constitution is written on. It is how we judge our courts, at least ideally, and that that these are the freedoms that we have come to understand. So in The Handmaid's Tale, the authoritarian regime uses all people to a means to an end. That is, that everybody has to do what they're supposed to do, regardless whether they want to, because in the end, it is better for society, and it's better. And what that truly means, it is better for the upper caste. This, of course, subverts the categorical imperative. So if the authoritarian regime in the Handmaid's Tale cast the people of the United States as immoral and it's the society itself as decadent and a dying of too much choice, the guiding Gileadian philosophy is to submit oneself to the hierarchical authorities, and which put the male on top of the household and government officials as the highest authorities in the land, who rule because it is God's will. While Kant would argue that most moral decisions are made by the individuals and who should reflexively ask whether their actions in that moment would be considered moral and virtuous, the Gilead officials only ask if the actions will consolidate power over the weak and intimidate the masses into compliance. So how do they do this? They do this through demands of a ritualized language, through the weaponization of surveillance technologies, through requires immediate reports of infractions by others. So you must, inform on each other, including any unauthorized speech. The women and children are raised to be silent. They encourage submission. They encourage a societal structure that is suspicious of any perceived impropriety, whether it exists or not. It militarizes what were once police duties and menaces citizens with secret police and torture techniques, and threatens other nations with war. All of this is diametrically opposed to our categorical imperative and consolidates authoritarian power. Now, a little more recently, we see other philosophers such as Isaiah Berlin. Isaiah Berlin spent the 40s and 50s really examining two different concepts of liberty that we see actually lifted and subverted by Aunt Lydia in the book. So one can imagine Aunt Lydia's soothing motherly tone as she persuades the handmaids to consider the new security that they're going to live under, recalling all those things that I have offered for you to think about. These are the consequences. If she does not accept these new freedoms, she will be put in jail and tortured and possibly hanged. In Offred's previous life, she had a job, family, friends that she is obligated to, and of which she is free to make. The price of those freedoms is a decadent society, according to Aunt Lydia. And she often feels that she must take precautions for her safety, such as not jogging in the dark or poorly lit places, to live in a world where sex is for sale. And indeed, in the United States and Atwood's United States, there are truly obscene opportunities for sex, such as a rolling van called Feels on Wheels and a porno mart. If you're familiar with Atwood, you will probably remember that she is very anti-pornography, and that this is something that does come through in The Handmaid's Tale. Aunt Lydia is offering a world where such unsavory businesses and culturally accepted irritants are abolished. The handmaids will have the freedom to fulfill their womanly duties, which coincide with the regime's new goals, which is to produce viable children for the commanders, which will consolidate their blessings from God and consolidate their power. So Aunt Lydia is using these concepts articulated from Isaiah Berlin from his 1958 Oxford speech to concepts of liberty. While Berlin is certainly not the first to observe the various conceptions of freedom, he used his career to differentiate how the idea of freedom can be used for interpretation and subverted while still using familiar words that Western democracies have held claim on for centuries. Berlin expands his thesis from two concepts of freedom, which we see here on the slide, and expands that in 1962, where he discusses further that while everybody is in favor of freedom in a great many senses, that some of the world's worst tyrannies have been undertaken in the name of freedom. So he is aware that because freedom is such an abstraction, that so many expectations can be hung upon it, that it can and will be perverted from what our Enlightenment forefathers had envisioned. So Berlin says the one familiar liberal sense is which freedom means that every man has a life to live and should be given the fullest opportunity to do so, and that there are only two adequate reasons for controlling men. The first is that there are goods besides freedom, such as, and for example, security or peace or culture, or other things which human beings need, which must be given to them, apart from the question of whether they want them or not. And the second definition is if one man obtains too much, he will deprive others of their freedom. That freedom for the pike means death to the carp. If you want, I'll go do a fish analogy here. And that this is a perfectly adequate reason for curtailing freedom. Still, curtailing freedom isn't the same as freedom. The second sense of the word freedom, this is where we have some pushback, is not so much a matter of allowing people to do what they want as the idea that I want to be governed by myself and not pushed around by other people. This idea leads to the supposition that to be free means to be self-governing. In this case, though, this other sense of freedom is that it's comparatively unimportant how much control there might be, as long as my people, my tribe, my church, and so forth are representing me and understanding my interest. I don't mind how much of my life is pried into, or whether there is a private province that is divided from the public province. And in this case, he uses the Soviet Union and other states with totalitarian governments. The second view is saying that if you are representing my interest, then I am free. And of course, between the idea of being free in the liberal sense that you have a life to live and that no one should curtail that freedom, versus I have other people of a like mind who are representing my interest, these are very incompatible. That Isaiah says, between these two views, I see no possibility of reconciliation. And of course, what we see is Gilead taking that second view of freedom, that they are encouraging the best interest of the people at the top and using them all as a means for an end. Now, here is an old familiar face, George Orwell. And he is, if you have taken freshman classes, undoubtedly you have come across the chestnut of an essay, Politics and the English Language. And why do I mention it here? Because it's the same way that Berlin is talking about two different abstractions of freedom. George Orwell has also articulated it. Now, George Orwell and Isaiah Singer lived during the same time, and they had lived through World War II. They had seen the rhetoric that had come through communist countries. They were not familiar with each other personally. So when we talk about Orwell, we talk about Isaiah Singer, we're really thinking about critical discourse theory. And that is that we're looking at the language, the rhetorics to really understand the multiple contexts that the speech can be made in. All right, so George Orwell in 1946, Politics in the English Language, serves as a warning that modern English, especially written English, is full of bad habits, which spread by imitation, and which can be avoided if one is willing to take the necessary trouble. But here's the thing, is that George Orwell's advice on how to clean up the language is used by Aunt Lydia, the character, to subvert that language. So Aunt Lydia demonstrates these bad habits that Orwell warns against. In the Testaments, it is revealed that in the United States, Aunt Lydia was a lawyer and a family judge. So her use of language is likely deliberate. Notice that she conflates the term ordinary in the quote on the screen. Ordinary, says Aunt Lydia, is what you're used to. This may not seem ordinary to you now, but after a time it will. It will become ordinary, which of course is soothing. But when you are raised to think that that what is ordinary is also free, it is not that much of a stretch to interpret what Aunt Lydia is saying as something different. She is subverting that language. So imagine if she says these words ordinary, but what the handmaids are hearing could be freedom. Freedom is what you're used to. This may not seem free to you now, but after a time it will. It will become freedom. So we get the subversion. We get Aunt Lydia is relying on concepts that the handmaids have been raised on to understand that that things have changed, but we're still going to use these familiar words to engage some compliance. So I think she is purposely engaging into the political indoctrinational rhetoric meant to persuade and soothe, to confuse and render inert objections to the replacement of the negative freedom, to be interfered with and accept whatever is ordinary is also regular, and whatever is regular is free enough. It's vitally important to understand that Aunt Lydia is offering these soothe familiarities while wearing a cattle prod. Now, she does come to regret that in the Testaments, but because she felt that her oral power should have been enough, but is as of now swinging on her belt. In the room where these sweet, soothing words are said, they are patrolled by older women in khaki uniforms, looking to strike slouching and daydreaming handmaids. This is the situation where grown women must raise their hands to use the bathroom, who will be timed and sometimes denied the use of the facilities. Aunt Lydia's ordinary life is bleak, and it is offered who must get used to it. The alternative is death. So in conclusion, and I feel that this, as abrupt as it might be, I want to end with an interview from Margaret Atwood herself. We look at this quote where she says, once any democracy starts curtailing freedom in the name of freedom, it may land us in trouble. What if you wanted to take over the US today? What flag would you wave successfully? The Handmaid's Tale is one of these answers, or one answer to these what ifs, and it goes on from there. So Margaret Atwood's stories of authoritarianism illustrating how members of a free society can be transformed into totalitarian control through the use of language and reframing the concept of freedom that seemed far-fetched in 1985. It's well known among the fans of Atwood that she did not include any techniques for persuading a society to give up their rights that had not seen a precedent in history or were not already in use. Her biggest influence is Romania in 1966 with Ceausescu, who enacted Decree 770, which, if you remember your history, this is where the Romanian government demanded that each woman in Romania have at least 4 children, that these women were under medical surveillance, and that those who could produce 5 or more children were rewarded. And this meant that the society were supposed to take care of these children, but also failed to do so. And so we have orphanages just filled at that time with unwanted, abandoned children, and maternal and child death rates skyrocketed. This was supposed to be a vision of the family, and Atwood watched this with much horror. She uses these examples to look at a totalitarian government and uses Aunt Lydia as a tool and her smooth language to pave the way for submission with her soothing tones, her accusations of personal selfishness among the handmaids, and the cattle prod. Aunt Lydia has every tool she needs to ensure compliance for this totalitarian regime, and Atwood wants every one of her readers to know it. Well, thank you for listening to my conference.
Thank you so much, Marcie. That was really interesting. That was really cool. I enjoyed that a lot.
Oh, thank you. And y'all have a really good the rest of your day. Do we have any questions?
I did just ask to make sure nobody has posted any questions as of yet, and nobody's answered me in the chat. People have liked it though. Almost looking like people have been liking it. But yeah, I don't see any questions, so I think we're done.
All right. Well, I appreciate y'all listening.
Thank you, Marcie.
And y'all have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.